I think Arizona, in terms of with ballot measures in particular, have some of the most restrictive laws in the country around how to qualify for the ballot. And I think that's something that we see there. But the state has voted previously for on medical debt. They've voted for minimum wage, so I think Arizona is a place that's just going to be really interesting this year with the Senate race down there and the presidential race being so competitive and some great congressional seats.
Let's talk about creating a life and country we're proud of. Together, I'm your host, Alvina Vasquez. Welcome to Alvina Talks Shift. Hi, Jessica. I am so excited to have you today on Alvina Talks Shift. Jessica and I met almost 10 years ago, actually. It's been a while.
Oh my goodness.
Isn't that crazy?
Wild.
But she has been working in really major life changing policy. When Jessica and I first met, she was working on a very important campaign for aid in dying, had wonderful experiences with a lot of advocates. She has experienced and is going through her own health issues and has learned a lot, and she's using that in her work. And now she's working on choice in Colorado on women's choices with their health and reproductive health. So, Jessica, thank you so much for being here. I know I have seen you grow as in your career as a leader.
Same friend.
It's
Same
impacts that you've had in people's lives. And so let's start there. How did you get started in working in such, I want to say sensitive issues, but really important issues in your career?
Some of it definitely came from luck and being in the right place, the right time. But I feel really honored that I've gotten to work on issues that are sometimes hitting people at the hardest point in their life when they're making decisions about what their end of life should be and what it shouldn't be, what they want and what they don't want. I just really have found that I've had health issues for the last few years that have been really demoralizing in how it's taken away choices from me on whether to start a family or not, or what I can and cannot do. So it's really come back to the fact that I think people should be able to make their own healthcare decisions. I trust patients to make their decisions, what's best for them, their family, and their lives. And so I feel really lucky to be able to do that type of work. But I started out in Montana working on end of life options back probably, 2010. So 14 years ago. And I just fell in love with the issue. I fell in love with working with folks that were so clear about what they wanted at end of life. And I found that once people kind of figured out what they wanted at the end of their life, they became a lot more fun, joyful, and just really meaningful conversations happened once people had a plan and the end didn't look as terrible as what we all fear.
Right.
And so I got really lucky and I did that work in Montana, and then I moved on to DC to do that work at the national perspective. And I really fell in love with our volunteers that were so committed, and you know, so many folks that were going through end of life illnesses or having a close family member or friend doing that spent their time advocating so the next person could have it better was just, it was really this altruistic, amazing experience to be a part of. And I felt really lucky to work on that for 7 years, including working with you to win the Colorado End of Life Options Act in 2016 that won with 65% of the vote in Colorado. I felt really honored to be able to help tell those folks' stories and help give people some of those options towards the end of their life. I was over at a mutual friend of ours' house, Alvina, a few months ago, and this woman's like, "Did you know Colorado has death with dignity?" I'm like, "Really? Tell us more." And so she's like, "I'm just so happy to live in a place where this happens." I'm like, and so sometimes I hear things like that and I'm just like, oh, what we do in politics really can have an effect on people's lives. And that's how people get brought into politics. It's how it affects their lives. And I think that's something that I feel really lucky to be able to work in things and work with people who constantly remind me of that.
I think for me, a big learning experience from that was when we were going through the legislature, and there was a lot of voices that were and that were in support and in opposition. And hearing the concerns from the disability community really moved me, because I learned things about how people with disabilities are treated in the medical system that I didn't even realize or recognize. And so I think there's so much to learn. Even when we're building policies that folks don't agree on, we have to listen to everybody at every stage, because we can learn so much about being better, how we treat each other. It's not even just like this big political thing. It's just like, how am I treating people with disabilities? How am I receiving
Hmm.
information, because they're having a different life experience than me, and things that I didn't even consider were going on in our world. And so I think for me the biggest learning experience was the bill died in the legislature. And it's always hard to let go of things you work for so hard, but you also want the perfect policy that's not going to put people in danger. And so I feel like, while it didn't pass through the legislature, it did pass at the ballot, but there were better guardrails in place. The disability voice did make an impact on how the policy is implemented today. And I think that's what we need to learn, is that just because folks are opposed, it doesn't mean anything bad. It means we need to learn, and we need to listen, and we need to find better ways to get to the solution that we need.
I think that's right, Alvina. I think there's places, we can have real conversation with each other and have bring in folks with different opinions, different ideas, and also think about how do we run how do we run campaigns that aren't just like the cookie cutter from DC.
Exactly.
This is how you do it. How do you bring in different voices? And sometimes it's harder, right? Quite frankly, as someone that, it's not sometimes when you bring in a lot of voices, you have to hear those voices, you bring them in. It takes more time, but the end product is worth it. It's, what we're looking at is complex policy that affects people's lives, right? Across the board, we're looking at things that really has an effect on people's lives. And so when thinking about that, you want to bring people in that are affected by these policies. You want to bring it in. You want to have discussions, sometimes even arguments on it, because that's how
Yeah.
you get to the better place, right? Is having the ability to have that discussion, I think, is really important when you're drafting policy. And I haven't worked on end of life in the last few years, but it was interesting to me that people with disabilities wanted this as an option, right? All the polling said that. But there were conversations we had to have, and there was conversations we need to have about what what does end of life look like, and what does it look like to have disabilities in our medical system. And I think those are all really fair questions to ask.
So you're having this experience in your life where your health issues are becoming a large portion of the time that you're taking to take care of yourself. But also, how is that changing your perspective on the work that you're doing, and where the future is in healthcare, and how we need to treat our patients?
I got diagnosed with severe endometriosis 3 years ago. I was hospitalized for the first time 26 years previously, but I was dismissed by doctors. I was told walk it off. I thought I was being weak. And I came up from the school of politics. You don't take sick days, got to play real good when it hurts real bad, walk it off. And so I just thought that I had a low tolerance for pain, or everyone else had their had their stuff together way more than I did, right? That it didn't affect them the way I did. And I finally drove myself quietly to the emergency room one day. I didn't tell anyone, but I'm like, oh, I'm sure there's nothing going to be wrong. I'm fine. And they're like, you're not fine. You have, giant cysts on your ovaries. We can't even see certain things. You're going to have to go in for surgery. I'm like, oh, really? And like, I cried
Um,
out of somewhat of relief that it wasn't just me losing my mind, which is what I thought it was initially. And I had to make quick decisions that affect my life, whether or not I wanted to start a family, whether or not what organs. And I had to do a lot of what organs they could take out, what didn't they take out. I had to do a lot of self research. And there, I just read this a really interesting article about how with endometriosis, which I have, it affects about 5% of the population, right? And the self advocacy is so important on this, and the information from the internet. We like to laugh at, like, oh, don't call Dr. Google. But when you're being dismissed by your doctors all the time, that's where you're finding out information. And I went to my doctors with lists of questions and like, oh, you seem to research this a lot. I'm like, yeah, yes, I do. I went to one nurse practitioner when I was in a lot of pain. They're like, you've already had a hysterectomy. You can't have endometriosis pain anymore. We wouldn't give you pain pills for that. Could barely move. And it turns out I had two more giant cysts like a month later. And the
Wow.
doctor, I went to an endometriosis specialist, and they're like, it was everywhere. It was all over the place.
Wow.
So you really, it's scary how much you have to advocate for yourself. I'm going to do a shout out to Nancy's Nook, which is a Facebook community that is a real awesome learning center if people have questions about this. But I had to ask a lot of questions. I spent so much time on the phone with my doctors and yelling at my insurance companies that wouldn't cover anesthesia in the state of Arizona or Montana. I don't know how
Wow.
many of you would want to have a 9-hour surgery without anesthesia. I wasn't interested in it, but there's just a lot of work and my that you have to do as a patient in this country. And my work on right now, I'm running in Colorado. I'm really excited to run what I think is the best abortion measure in all the land, to have a constitutional right for abortion access. And this is really important to me. And I've been thinking about this a lot because, in the last few years, I had my uterus removed. So, I can't get pregnant. And why am I doing this work right now? My choices were not all my own because the medical patriarchy, because the research wasn't in there for endometriosis. I had choices taken away from me because they didn't do the work, quite frankly. They're just not doing the work on this. And a lot of folks think that the only purpose of a uterus or ovaries are to give birth is to have babies. And that's not the only purpose here. So I've had so many of my choices taken away from me. I'm going to make sure that people have access to healthcare, and whatever healthcare they seem fit is, I'm just going to support that. And so I'm really excited to be working on this issue.
I love when you post on social about your health but seriously, people don't talk about how hard it is. A healthy person doesn't know how hard it is for somebody that's going through a medical crisis. And so, well, I know some folks are uncomfortable about sharing that much, but when you do that, it reminds us all to like continue to advocate for ourselves. So when you're at your lowest and you're on the phone for hours with insurance and those stories that you shared, what got you through that? What gets you to keep fighting? Because at some point you're like, I don't even know who to talk to anymore.
Thank you for saying that, Alvina. Like, I posted a lot of this on social media, partially because I work in healthcare advocacy. A third of my friends are lawyers, right? And I'm on the phone almost crying with my insurance company after the 200th phone call, right? If I want to just lose, if I'm struggling this much, everyone else is also struggling this much, but we don't talk about it. We also think like the sick person should just be like, I'm so grateful my insurance company covered some something. And it's like, no,
Some part of it.
when the CEOs of those companies are making 17 million a year, they're making a decision not to cover things, and we can do better. And so I think part of it was like I had great support, but being sick and having what people consider an invisible illness that you don't see right away is really lonely. But I did
Yeah.
get a few people diagnosed with endometriosis and got them into doctors that could actually do something. And so I think I'm going to keep doing it, even though I'm sure some folks want to block me because I write so much about it. Um, I think it's necessary. It's part of how it's, we have to tell how bad it is for things to improve sometimes. And I think this is one of those scenarios.
And also, I think for your own self, like being alone in a room on the phone with insurance and not having anybody around you where you could be like, I cannot believe how ridiculous this is. And having that outlet for you to share that so you can get it off your chest and move on, I'm sure is super helpful also that you have this community of support.
100%. One surgery I was supposed to have, ended up having the surgery, but the insurance company made a mistake on the billing. And so I was going to get like a $24,000 bill from it. I walked
What?
out of the surgery room. I walked out of it even like after having done steroids for a week preparing for it. And because I was arguing with my insurance company. I walked out of the room because I didn't know if they would cover it. And on the way home from the surgery I walked out of, I get a call from the anesthesiologist in Montana saying, your insurance hasn't covered your bill yet from this summer. I'm like, of course this is happening. Of course.
Wow, what a domino effect.
And I'm not the only one dealing with this, right? And I'm in a position of privilege to be dealing with this, right? And it really made me feel like I was like losing my mind half the time. And it had an effect on my relationships, my work, everything else. And I think that's something else I've learned too, is that these things don't just affect you in a vacuum anymore.
Oh yeah, no.
It has an effect on your life. It's not just like a clean line between work and home or health and not. But I lost organs because I didn't take care of because this didn't get taken care of earlier. I will have health effects the rest of my life because of it.
What is the business professional culture shift that we need, in your opinion?
I think we need a lot. I think we need to be thinking about I think COVID's actually has done some helpful things around this, around flexibility. I think, we need to be okay with some people have to work late at night or early in the morning, depending on what their life gives them in some ways, right? We need to have some of that. We need to we need to realize that there's generally more than one way to do things. And that's not in everything, but we need to be thinking about how can we fit things in that works for people in their lives? How are we looking at things almost more as a puzzle piece than just like a standard?
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of times I think you can make things work with different layers, and we have to be okay with that.
That's pretty hard in your line of work.
Yeah, I think it's hard in a lot of line of work, but I've worked with really supportive people that like, I'm really lucky. If I have to go to the doctor in the middle of the day, that is not a huge deal. And that's part of the other reason I wanted to start my own company this year is that I wanted to be able to build the team with some of the flexibility that I have other folks that can cover me when I'm in this scenario, or someone else is doing some of the paperwork or some of the other pieces of my work. So I think it's doable. Obviously, election day doesn't change. And having some flexibility doesn't mean you're not working hard or strategically, right? It just means that from 2 to 4 might be that might be where the pain flares up, and it's different for different people, and that you sometimes just have to build your job around those pieces. Like I know I personally have to work a lot of weekends because I will have a pain flare up in some afternoon during the week, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just not great when I have that, when it's hitting me hard, right? Just not great. So my adjustment is, how do I do it at night or weekends when that happens?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see how women are kind of leading these shifts in our professional spaces
Mm-hmm.
and centering those needs around families, individual mental health, all those kinds of things.
Yeah. And I think I just have seen more of that shifting in the last few years. Like, notice like all the empty office buildings in downtown DC right now.
Yeah.
There's a lot of us that do a lot of work that traditionally just would have been in DC that's changed. And I think it's good. And I do think it's because of women in the workplace. And I also just think the more diversity we bring to the workplace, the more creative solutions we're going to have to make the work better for everyone. Oh, it's not perfect yet, but I think, I think we need to keep striving to change, to make it better.
So you have an amazing career because you're living in Montana, working in Colorado, you've worked in Arizona. How do you do that? How do you travel and make such a big impact and build community? Because you have a really strong community in Colorado, but you're not here all the time.
Yeah, no, I spend about a week a month in Colorado, and I really try not to have Zoom calls while I'm in Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
I really think it's important to see people. I think building relationships is super important. Like, I think you have to spend the time, and it's like, it's not everything of your success or your week can go on a productivity spreadsheet or a database. Sometimes it's just showing up, right? And being there. I think it's working the phones a lot when you're not places. And I'm really intentional about thinking about Colorado people. I'm like, oh, what's going on there? What's up there? And really checking in a lot. I also work with really talented people that help me be able to focus my time into what I really love doing. What I am good at is relationship building. So I really spend that time. I really have been lucky to have people that support me so I can do that work. And I think it's sometimes about the 10,000 cups of coffee.
Yeah, yeah. I do love myself a cup of coffee every day.
Yeah. And it's important to like also learn about people beyond just like what they get you for work, right?
Right. Yeah, our in our friendship, we worked together and we kept the relationship going on. We haven't actually worked together since then. What,
No.
2017 probably. So, yeah, you just got to keep going. You just got to keep connecting.
Yeah. And like when you see a job that would be good for someone, send it to them. Like, hey,
Right.
thought of you when I saw this. I think those are things that really makes a difference. And I think, I think as we figure out how to do things differently and keep it building, that's what's going to matter.
So, let's talk about your company. What is it called? How did you get started? I'm so excited that when you told me you were doing
I am too. I started a company called Simple Majority, and you can imagine why I have the name Simple Majority. But I wanted to do so. I wanted to bring in really talented people. Our focus is on ballot measures, but we do some other work um, around political violence, legislation, all those other things too. But really focusing in on ballot measures. And I just hired my third staffer who's starting today. So
Wow.
excited to have Natalie on board. But we're really excited. It's a small firm now, but we partner up with some other firms at times to really do do meaningful projects, and we've gotten to do just some interesting work. I started this company partially because I knew moving forward, I needed some of that flexibility. I also, as we've talked about before, Alvina, I have really severe dyslexia and I have ADHD. And so for me, having a couple of projects is actually a better work model for me. And then having someone else handle
Mhm.
some more of the detailed pieces is a better work model for me. Like I love kind of thinking about different ways to do things and being in different
Yeah.
places. And so I needed to have something that worked better for how my brain works, how my health works, and what kind of life I imagine. And so starting my firm was a way for me to do that.
And so you've taken on several clients already, right?
Yeah, I'm doing a lot of work around transportation.
What is happening in Arizona? I'm so curious to hear because it seems like there's like some little spots of progressivism there.
100%. Arizona's interesting. Arizona is a really interesting state to work in. Biden won there last time. Mark
Yeah.
Kelly is our senator is one of our senator was one of the senators there. I think Ruben Gallego is going to win in that Senate seat in Arizona, which is really exciting. There are some great members of the congressional delegation, and there are some great folks running for some of those open seats that I'm really excited about. I think Arizona, in terms of with ballot measures in particular, have some of the most restrictive laws in the country around how to qualify for the ballot, and I think that's something that we see there. But the state has voted previously for on medical debt. They've voted for minimum wage. So I think Arizona is a place that's just going to be really interesting this year with everything happening in the everything happened with the Senate race down there and the presidential race being so competitive and some great congressional seats. I think it's really interesting. Like we in Arizona, they have a great governor, attorney general, secretary of state, and I think there's so much diversity in Arizona and so many voices being heard there. That we're going to continue to see some really interesting policies out of the state, and we're going to have to push back on some really harmful, mean-spirited, cruel, stupid policies.
Mm, yeah. I mean, I feel like that's the state of politics when we're always fighting against some really mean spirited
It's just
ideas.
it's just mean. Some of it, like there's a possibility of another anti-immigration one up, and
Oh, wow.
it's stupid, mean, and cruel. And we can do better. We can do better. But Arizona is also the state that voted in 2022 for Dreamers for college tuition for
Right.
Dreamers, right? Like so, and that was a bipartisan effort, and those things happen. And I think there's just more of that to be had across the country. And I think more of those conversations need to be happening. But the people don't want the anti-immigration stuff. They just don't want it. And so I do think that it will fail, but I think we have to work on it.
Well, I think having you here has been amazing. It's such a great reminder to think through everything that we've been through and we're still in touch. I love to value those types of friendships. It's such a cool
Same.
space that we work in because we really do build family and community just based on projects because our values are in the same space.
Yeah, and I think building that community and family is so important with the work we do. We do really hard work a lot of times, right? But we do really meaningful work too. I loved it when we had breakfast with Bianca that you brought your son with us. And I love the fact that's part of our community that we live in. And a lot of times I go to meetings and there's a couple of kids running around, and I love that. I think it really creates like a sense of commitment to both the issue and to each other. And when we disagree on something or a strategy, right, I can be like, okay, how are they thinking about this? It gives more depth into the relationships that we all have.
Totally. So much humanity in that. Well, thank you, Jess. Our time is up. That was really fast.
That went super fast.
But I really appreciate you giving me time. I know that you're super busy. So
oh no, it's fine.
Thanks
this
again
was fun.
for spending the morning with me.
Have a great one, and we will talk soon.
Thank you for watching Alvina Talks Shift. Please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, engage, empower, evolve. If you liked this episode, or if you want more content like this, go to alvinatalksshift.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.